retired cowboy, lived alone for years, until 5 Apache gorgeous widows begged for shelter on his ranch.
Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
Late November 1882. The wind carried frost early that year. Up in the hills of Silver Butte, Colorado Territory, Reed Callahan had already sealed the windows with oilcloth and stacked his final cords of firewood. He wasn't expecting company. He never did. The nearest town was 12 miles downhill through rock and snow. The nearest neighbor had died in spring. The cabin stood alone, square-shouldered against the slope, built by Reed's hands 6 years back when he left the Army and decided he'd rather speak to goats than men. Reed was 32. Before this, he'd worked as a translator, Apache, Spanish, Comanche, used by the military when they didn't want blood, just borders. But he'd seen blood anyway. Too much. He'd seen young women shot during raids, children shoved into wagons, old men left half-buried in their own blankets. And when he tried to speak on it, nobody listened. So he left. Since then, silence had suited him. That afternoon, he'd been splitting logs behind the cabin. Thick spruce, still sap wet. His gloves were torn at the thumbs, and his boots had a crack in the left heel. He swung with clean rhythm, not for exercise, not to clear his mind, just because winter was long and would burn fast. He had a kettle heating on the stove and a haunch of goat meat waiting to stew when the quiet changed. It wasn't the wind. It was too steady. Reed froze mid-swing and listened. Bootsteps. Several. Light. Cautious. Human. He moved around the side of the cabin, hand near the revolver on his belt, but not drawing yet. As he cleared the porch and stepped past the split-rail fence, he saw them. 5 women. They stood at the edge of the clearing where the snow met scrub. No horses. No wagon. Just feet red from cold, wrapped in rags. They wore dresses that might have been leather or cotton once, now patched, torn, and crusted with frost. Blankets hung from their shoulders, barely covering what was left of dignity. One of them, the one in front, curvy build, dark hair tied back with sinew, took one step forward. Her mouth was dry, but her eyes held steady. Reed didn't move. The woman didn't beg. She spoke straight. "We need a place. One night. We don't ask more than that." Reed looked at her, looked past her. He saw what she wasn't saying. The younger one behind her had a blood stain down her thigh. The tallest of them held her arm like something had been dislocated. One woman carried nothing but a cloth satchel. These weren't strays. These were survivors. Reed glanced toward the trees behind them. Nothing moved. No posse. No riders. He thought about the last time he let someone in. 3 years ago. A trapper who turned out to be running from debt, drank his stores, stole his mare, and left him tied in the barn for a day and a half. But these weren't men. These were Apache widows. He could see it in how they stood, proud, half-wild, not broken but worn out. He opened the gate. Didn't say a word. They entered one by one. Slow, watching him as they passed. He caught the scent of blood and pine needles on their clothes. One of them, older than the rest, tall, broad-hipped, deep lines on her face, nodded once but didn't thank him. Inside the cabin, the fire was already low. Reed added a split log, moved the kettle over, and fetched 6 tin bowls from the shelf. He ladled what he had, stew from last night, thick with root vegetables and meat, and passed the bowls without comment. They sat in a circle near the hearth. Sayin, the one who had spoken, stayed on her knees near the fire, palms open toward the heat. Her dress was torn across the chest. Reed noticed the cut. It had been stitched once, then torn again. The skin beneath was sun-browned, damp with cold sweat. She didn't hide it, didn't seem to care. Reed felt his throat tighten. Not desire, not shame, just anger at whoever had done this. The youngest, Tala, though he didn't know her name yet, trembled as she drank. She made no sound, no tears, just quiet swallowing and wide, exhausted eyes. They hadn't come for charity. They had come because there was nowhere else. After supper, Reed handed them folded wool blankets. He didn't ask names, didn't offer small talk. That wasn't how you build trust with people who'd been hunted. He unrolled 2 extra bedrolls from the storage chest, made a place beside the stove. The floor was hard, but warmer than outside. He set down the last blanket near San. She looked up at him. No fear, just calculation. Her eyes scanned his face, his posture, his belt. She knew he was armed, knew he was alone, knew what he could do if he wanted. But he didn't. He just walked away and sat by the window with his rifle across his lap, watching the dark outside in case someone else followed. Behind him, he heard them settle in. One woman started whispering in Apache, soft, gentle sounds. Another laughed, just once low and short. Sayan said something back, then quiet again. It sounded like home, or the echo of one. Reed didn't sleep that night. Not fully. He watched the door, listened to the crack of the fire, and tried not to think too hard about the fact that 5 strangers had entered his home and he wasn't scared. Not really. He felt something else. Responsibility. It sat in his chest, heavy as the snow on the roof. And he didn't turn them out. The morning came quiet and sharp. Reed was already up before the sun crested the ridge. He had slept in the chair by the window, boots on, rifle across his lap. His neck ached, but he didn't stretch. He listened first. Inside the cabin, all 5 women were still asleep. Blankets curled, breath even. The fire had gone to coals. One of them, Paya, the tall one with the hawkish eyes, lay closest to the door like a guard. Tala, the youngest, slept with her knees to her chest, face buried in her arms. The others were scattered across the floor, wrapped in wool and whatever scraps they carried in. Reed set the rifle aside and moved to the stove. He lit the fire slow, quiet, added water to the kettle. His hands worked without thought, habits older than fear. By the time the first light bled across the floorboards, Sayan stirred. She sat up on one elbow, hair loose around her neck, her deerskin dress wrinkled, still torn across the chest. She didn't cover herself. She watched him. Not shy, not forward, just watching, measuring. He met her gaze and gave a short nod. She stood. They didn't speak. Reed handed her a coffee tin. She understood, measured the grounds without asking. By the time the others woke, the scent of coffee filled the cabin. Steam rose from the tin mugs like breath in winter. They ate goat stew again. No one complained, not even the younger one. After breakfast, Sayan stepped outside without a word. The others followed. Reed stayed back, letting the door close. He watched them from the window. They didn't wander. They moved with purpose. Sayan checked the goat pen, whistled once to see how the animals responded. Kaya picked up a torn blanket from the porch rail, looked over the stitching, and sat down to mend it. Paya circled the cabin, eyes scanning the hills, as if expecting someone to come. Nolly dragged a water bucket toward the well without being asked. Tala just stood, hands to her mouth, breathing in the cold. None of them were guests. They were survivors. And survivors didn't sit still. Reed walked out and began splitting wood again. Sayan joined him before long. She didn't ask, just picked up kindling and stacked it beside the cabin. She moved slow, still sore but stubborn. Her dress clung to her legs as she bent, damp from snow. The rip in her side slit was wider today, revealing more skin than she probably realized. Or maybe she did, but she never once looked at him to see if he noticed. She didn't need to. Midday came. The sun barely warmed the ground, but it cleared the frost from the roof. Inside, Reed brought out what little supplies he had: flour, salt, lard, slab of dried pork. He sat on the table and watched as Nolly and Kaya began preparing dough. They worked like they'd done it 1,000 times. One kneaded, one cleaned the table. No chatter, just rhythm. He sat back, arms crossed. The questions were stacking now. Who were they? Where did they come from? Why now? He didn't ask aloud. But late that afternoon, Sayan stood at the doorway while the others worked and finally gave him something. "We came from below Fort Garland," she said. "There was a raid. White ranchers. Drunken ones. Thought we were hiding warriors." She looked him in the eye. "We weren't." Reed didn't speak. He just looked at her face, bruised near the temple, the side of her neck red with old scrapes. "Most of us lost our men months ago," she continued. "But they don't care. Widow or not. They take." Reed nodded once. No sympathy in his face, just understanding. "They burned our shelter, took the little we had. We walked 5 days." Reed looked down. 5 days in that snow. No shoes. Sayan stepped further in. "We saw your smoke." From up the ridge. Figure a man lived here alone, but we'd never have risked it. He stared at her a moment. You guessed right, he said. She gave his smallest smile, then dropped it. We won't stay long. Just long enough to walk again. That part, Reed didn't respond to. That evening, he brought out extra tools from the shed. A second axe, nails, rope. He didn't explain, just set them out. By dusk, Paya had patched the back gate. Kaya had stitched a torn curtain. Nolly had fixed the door latch. And Reed found himself sitting on the porch with his coffee, watching them move like they'd always belonged there. Not once did any of them ask what he expected in return. Not once did he offer rules. Sayan passed him once on her way inside. Her hip brushed his knee, not by accident, not exactly on purpose either. Their eyes met again. That night, all 5 women slept indoors. Blankets spread closer to the stove. Tala curled beside Kaya. Paya slept by the door again, arms crossed over her chest. Nolly lay flat on her back, eyes open in the dark. Sayan took the far end, nearest the chair where Reed sat again. She didn't sleep immediately. She lay on her side, facing him. I know what men expect, she said, voice low. Reed said nothing. I know what people will say if we stay too long. Still, he didn't answer. She studied his face, the scar near his left eye, the tension in his shoulders. Then she nodded once to herself and rolled over. Reed sat there a long while, staring at the door, then the fire, then at her back beneath the blanket. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was guarding something. He felt like he was part of it, and he didn't turn them away. Snow came heavy that night, muffling the land in white silence. By morning, the world outside was still. No wind, no prints, no sound. Just drifts along the rails and a low gray sky that hadn't broken since dawn. Inside the cabin, the air was warm but tight. The fire had burned down low again. The smell of boiled coffee lingered. Wood crackled faintly. Nobody had spoken yet. Reed sat at the table, sharpening a blade. The sound of the whetstone, slow, deliberate, matched his breath. Across the room, Sayan stood near the stove, adding more water to the kettle. Her dress clung to her legs, damp from brushing past snow on the porch earlier. She hadn't asked before going out, just took the bucket and returned with it full. The others moved about quietly. Kaya swept near the hearth. Tala was folding a blanket. Paya, still watchful, examined the edge of a window for air leaks. Nolly stood near the door, arms crossed, as if deciding whether she could risk stepping out again. Sayan spoke first. You get visits from town? Reed didn't lift his eyes. No. She waited. Someone bring you goods? I go down once a month. When? He looked up now. Not until after the thaw. She nodded once. That told her what she needed. No one would be checking in. No surprises. If anything happened out here, no one would know until spring. She returned to the stove. Reed noticed the way she moved, still sore but strong. Her shoulders bore tension, but not fatigue. This wasn't a woman recovering from rest. This was a woman who hadn't had any. Not in weeks. Maybe months. When breakfast ended, Reed brought out a map from the small chest near his bed, unfolded it on the table. It was worn, stained from oil and rain, edges fraying. He pointed to the valley below Silver Butte. There's a trail down to Carson's Fork. You follow the river south, you'll hit some outposts. Sayan stepped closer. You want us gone? He met her eyes. I'm showing you the way in case you still plan to leave. She leaned her hands on the edge of the table, close enough that her fingers brushed the edge of the blade he'd just sharpened. We would have kept walking, she said. But the youngest, she gestured slightly toward Tala, who sat by the fire tying a strip of cloth around her foot. She can't anymore. The wound's older than we told you. Reed looked toward Tala. The cloth was bloodstained. The girl noticed him watching and tugged her dress lower over her legs, ashamed. Reed turned back to Sayan. I've got salve. Not much, but it'll help. Sayan nodded once. We'll work for it. I didn't ask for that. She looked at him hard. I'm not offering for you. I'm offering for her. Reed didn't argue. He brought the salve, sat down on the floor beside Tala. She shrank back, but he didn't touch her. Just opened the tin and set it beside her knee. You do it, he said quietly. Just keep it wrapped after. Tala looked at him once, then reached for the tin. Paya crossed the room and stood behind her, watching Reed. She didn't say anything either, but her face relaxed, just a little. That afternoon, the cabin grew busy in a quiet way. Kai asked for thread and needle. She repaired Reed's coat, carefully stitching along the seam at the shoulder. Nolly cleaned the shelves. Tala rested. Sane stayed, mostly outside. Reed heard the axe again. Once. Twice. He stood and stepped onto the porch. She was splitting kindling near the side shed, her breath rising in clouds. Her dress was soaked near the waist from kneeling in snow. The tear along her chest hadn't been mended. It hung low, exposing the upper swell of her breasts. She didn't notice him watching, or didn't care. Reed walked over and set a fresh log on the stump. "That blade's too light," he said. Sane gave a grunt. "It works." He handed her a heavier axe. She took it, adjusted her grip, brought it down clean and fast, the kind of swing that came from years of doing it for survival, not pride. Reed nodded once. "You from White Mountain?" Sane paused, sweat already rising at her collarbone. "No," she said, "near Fort Apache." Before it all turned. That filled in what had been missing. The accent, the way she carried herself, not tribal nobility, not valley farmer's wife either. Somewhere between. She looked up. "You worked with the army?" "Used to." "They send you here?" "No. I left." She didn't ask why. That told Reed she already had a good idea. They finished splitting and carried the kindling inside together. That night it snowed again. Reed cooked fresh meat, rabbit, caught earlier that week. Nolly added herbs she'd found by the shed. The scent warmed the cabin more than the fire. After they ate, the room settled into quiet. Not heavy, not awkward. Sayan sat nearest the fire. Her legs stretched long, one knee bent. The tear in her dress shifted when she moved, revealing more of her inner thigh. Reed noticed, but she didn't adjust it. He didn't stare. He looked once, then away. She looked at him, not shy, not offering, just seeing if he'd flinch. He didn't. Later, when the others were asleep, Sayan stood and poured herself a small cup of water. She didn't drink it, just held it, standing in the doorway between firelight and shadow. "You're not like the others," she said. Reed didn't move from his seat. "I've met quiet men," she went on, "and I've met patient ones. But most still expect something in return, sooner or later." He met her eyes. "Do you?" Sayan watched him, long enough that her face softened. "I don't know what I expect," she said finally, "but I'm not afraid." She stepped closer, close enough that he could feel her body heat. Her dress clung to her curves, her chest rising and falling steady. Her face was marked by travel and smoke, but there was beauty there. Not fragile beauty, stubborn beauty. Earned. Reed didn't touch her, didn't speak. She stood there 1 second longer, then turned and laid back down in her spot. He stared at the fire. He didn't know if it was trust building or temptation growing, but he didn't want them to leave anymore. Not even one of them. And the thought scared him more than it should have. The next morning, Reed found himself waking earlier than usual. He hadn't meant to fall asleep, but sometime in the night, the fire died low, and the chill crept into his bones. The smell of wood smoke lingered thick in the air. He sat up in the chair by the stove and stretched his neck, then scanned the cabin. They were all still there. Sayan was curled on her side, face turned toward the coals. Paya, as always, lay nearest the door. Kaya had shifted in her sleep, arms stretched across Tala's legs like a protective gesture. Nolly slept on her back, hands folded neatly on her chest. None of them stirred. Reed stood slowly, walked to the stove, and stoked the fire back to life. He kept his movements quiet, but as he poured water into the kettle, he heard Sayan rise. She stepped beside him silently, close enough that their shoulders brushed. Her voice came low. "I thought you'd be gone when we woke. I don't go far." She looked at him. "You always stay on the edge like this." He didn't answer. Outside, it was still snowing. Thin now, the kind that would keep falling until the land gave in. Sayan poured 2 tin cups of coffee and handed him one. She didn't ask for permission, just handed it over like they'd done this 100 times. Reed drank, then finally asked the thing he hadn't yet. "You said bounty men hit your shelter. What happened after?" Sayan sipped. "They came at night. Claimed they were looking for 2 men who'd taken horses near Canyon Hollow. No proof, just guns and drink." Her jaw tightened. "They beat Paya first." Said she mouthed off. then took Nolly's bag. We had food. Not much. They took it all anyway. Reed glanced at Nolly, who was still sleeping, her face calm now but bruised faintly beneath the eye. They burned everything, Sayin added. Didn't kill us. Said we were lucky. You weren't with a tribe? She shook her head. No tribe claims widows without status. And we didn't have men left to speak for us. Reed nodded slowly. That was something he understood better than most. In frontier justice, protection came not from law, but from who stood beside you. After breakfast, Reed walked out to check the traps. Snow had coated the valley, but the sky was clearing. He followed the trail down toward the edge of the creek. Caught a rabbit, a squirrel, enough for stew, maybe a roast if they stretched it. He returned by mid-morning. When he came over the ridge, he paused. The cabin didn't look the same. There was smoke from the chimney, but also a second line of smoke curling behind the shed. He moved faster, hand resting near his holster, eyes scanning. But it wasn't danger. Sayin had built a second fire pit, and around it, the women were working. Quiet, coordinated. Nolly was boiling cloth in a tin bucket. Kaya was cleaning out rabbit skins with a bone scraper. Tala sat wrapped in blankets beside the fire, her foot bandaged tighter than before, and a faint smile on her lips as she watched them. Paya stood when she saw Reed, but didn't speak, just nodded once. He nodded back. He walked over to Sayin, who was kneeling near the woodpile, breaking kindling. You built this fast. We're not looking to waste your food or fuel. Figure we cook outside when it's clear. He handed her the fresh rabbit. She looked up at him, surprised. You didn't have to do that, she said. You didn't have to stay, he replied. That night, they ate better than before. Rabbit stew with a bit of crushed pepper Sayin had pulled from a hidden pouch she kept tied beneath her skirt. It was the first time they all sat together, at the same table. No one said much, but when Nolly laughed quietly at something Kaya said in Apache, it wasn't bitter. It was soft, light, and Reed felt something in his chest ease, just a little. Later, after the dishes were cleaned and the floor swept, Sayin stayed seated while the others turned in. She waited until Reed stepped back toward the stove. You keep waiting for us to ask for more, she said. He turned. No. Yes, she said plainly. You think eventually we'll take this too far. Make a claim on your bed, your food, your life. Reed looked at her. I don't think that. Then what do you think? He didn't answer right away. She stood, walked over. The firelight caught her face, the faint scar above her lip, the curve of her neckline, still exposed from the torn dress she never bothered to repair. I know what men see when they look at me now, she said. I know what they want. Reed's throat tightened, not from lust, from something older, deeper. I'm not like them, he said low. I know, she replied. That's the problem. They stood there close, the air thick between them. She raised a hand, just slightly, and pressed it flat to his chest. Her fingers were cold. His heart beat steady under her palm. Reed didn't move, but he didn't stop her. She leaned up, slow, and kissed him. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't shy. Her mouth was warm, patient, and searching. When she pulled back, she didn't explain. She didn't apologize. She just whispered, "Good night," and went to her bedroll. Reed stood still. He didn't sleep for a long time, but for the first time, he didn't guard the door. He watched her back rise and fall with her breath, and felt like maybe, for once, he wasn't waiting to be alone again. The days that followed moved slow but full. The snow eased for a time. The wind still cut sharp in the mornings, but the sky opened wide, and the light stayed longer past dusk. It gave the cabin and those inside it a rhythm. Wake, work, warm, sleep, and in between, something unspoken began to settle in. They were no longer just surviving. They were existing. Sayin didn't speak of the kiss again. Neither did Reed. But something had shifted. She moved more freely now, closer, more deliberate in how she stood near him, how she handed him tools, how her fingers brushed his arm and lingered just long enough to say, I remember. You didn't push me. I see you. And Reed? He didn't flinch. He didn't speak more than usual. But every time she passed, his eyes followed just for a second. Every time he stepped outside, he glanced back to see if she was watching. She often was. That morning, Reed rode down into the lower pass for the first time in weeks. He He needed salt, needed to check the line of his traps that ran near the aspen grove. He left before sunrise. The others were still stirring. Sayan was the only one who met his eyes before he left. She didn't ask where he was going. She just held his coat steady while he pulled it on and then adjusted the collar gently, without a word. He rode out with the sun rising behind him, cutting light across the snow. By the time he returned in the early afternoon, the cabin looked different. Smoke still rose. The shed door had been patched. Firewood had been neatly stacked against the cabin wall. But it was something else, the air, the quiet. He felt it before he saw it. Something had happened. He stepped down from the saddle, scanned the yard. Then the door opened. Paya stood in the doorway, arms folded. "We had a visitor," she said. Reed felt his jaw tighten. "Who?" "White man. Mid-30s. Wore a deputy star, but no horse. From town." "No." "Said he was passing through from Wolf Hollow. Claimed he was looking for 2 stolen mules." Reed stepped past her into the cabin. The other women were seated. All looked calm, except Tala, whose eyes were red. She had been crying, but not now. Sayan was by the window, arms crossed. "He wasn't here for mules," Sayan said. "He saw us through the trees. Came asking questions. Where we were from. If we were legal." Reed's voice came low. "He touched any of you?" Sayan shook her head. "He asked why we were here. Said we must be under someone's authority." "What did you say?" "That you were our employer. That we cook and clean for a roof and bread. That we weren't prisoners. That he could ride on." Reed looked at the table. A ring of wet snow marked where the man had set a cup. His cup. He stepped out onto the porch, scanned the trees. Nothing moved. No boot prints near the fence anymore, blown over by wind or swept. But the feeling didn't pass. He stayed outside most of the afternoon, chopping wood, watching the ridge. Eyes narrowed. Sayan came to him just before dusk. She didn't speak right away, just leaned against the post beside him. "We should go," she said finally. "No," Reed said. She blinked. He could bring more men. More questions. If he was going to, Reed replied. He wouldn't have come alone the first time. Sayan folded her arms. "You think we're safe here?" "I think we're safer than out there." She was quiet for a while. Then, Tala panicked when he asked her name. Froze. Almost cried. He saw it. He saw she was scared. I lied fast enough, but it shook her. "She's young," Reed said, "and she's been hunted before." Sayan turned to face him. "She's not the only one." Reed nodded. "I know." That night, the fire burned longer than usual. Reed stayed awake near the door. Paya stayed up too, sharpening a knife. Sayan rested near the window, eyes open. No one said it, but the whole cabin felt it. The outside world had noticed them. They weren't invisible anymore. But still, no one ran. The next morning, Reed took Tala with him to the shed. Just the two of them. He showed her how to tighten a brace on the door latch, how to line the traps, how to read signs in the snow, broken twigs, prints, changes in wind. She said little, but her hands stopped trembling. When they came back in, Tala looked at Sayan and gave a small nod. Later, while the others cleaned hides and mended seams, Reed and Sayan went behind the cabin. She handed him a cup of boiled root tea. He took it. "I was wrong," she said. "About what?" "Thinking we'd be a burden if we stayed too long." "You weren't." She looked at him carefully. "Are we now?" Reed didn't speak right away. He reached out, slow, careful, and brushed a lock of hair from her cheek. Then, still quiet, said no. She leaned in and kissed him again. It lasted longer this time. Neither of them looked around to see if anyone was watching. And this time, she didn't walk away afterward. She stayed beside him, her hand in his coat pocket, her shoulder against his arm, both of them watching the woods in silence. It was near the end of December when the snow thickened again, heavier and wetter than before, falling in sheets that soaked through cloth and hid the land beneath a waist-high silence. The cabin turned into a fortress, not by design, but by necessity. For 3 days, none of them left. The woodpile had to be rationed. The goats kept inside the shed. Water melted from snow. Meals stretched thin. No one complained. Inside, the women worked steadily. Paya built a rack near the stove to dry wet boots. Kaya boiled herbs she had saved in small bundles wrapped with twine, their scents sharp and clean, cutting through the smoke. Nolly repaired the roof, seams from inside, using scrap leather. Tala rested more. The wound on her foot nearly closed now. She spoke more freely these days, not in full sentences, but enough to ask where Reed kept the sugar or if she could help stoke the fire. Sand stayed close to Reed. They didn't share a bed. Not yet, but they shared a rhythm. They chopped wood side by side. He handed her a coat lining when he saw her shiver. She brushed snow off his back when he came in from the shed. At night, she sat nearest him, their knees touching under the table, her hand sometimes resting on his thigh, just briefly, like a promise she didn't need to say aloud. It was the fourth day of snow when the question that had been quietly rising among them finally found its voice. Nolly asked it. She stood by the table after dinner, hands drying on her skirt, eyes fixed on Reed. What happens in spring? The room quieted. The stew pot still steamed in the center of the table. Sand looked up. Paya stopped tying a knot in rope. Kaya waited still. Reed didn't look away. What do you want to happen? He asked. Nolly's voice didn't shake. That man from Wolf Hollow might come back. Others might too. We're 5 Apache widows living in a white man's home. Even if you've done nothing wrong, they won't see it that way. Sayin cut in. He's done nothing wrong. None of us have. But the law doesn't care, Pius said flatly. Reed leaned back in the chair, the wood creaking under his weight. I know what the law says, he answered. And I know what the land says. Out here, no one survives winter unless they work together. In spring, we make it look how we need to. Sayin's brow creased. Ow! Reed looked at her, then looked at all of them. I've got records. Papers. I could draw up something saying I've taken on live-in help. 5 hired hands. All legal. All listed. Paya raised an eyebrow. And the town will just believe that. They don't have to, Reed replied. As long as it's written down and stamped. No one look close unless they want to fight. Sayin studied him. You do that. I already did something worse, remember? His eyes met hers. I'll let you in. That earned a short laugh from Nolly, then a second from Kaya. Even Paya cracked a grin. Sayin didn't laugh, but she stood, walked over to him, and kissed him in front of all of them. Not long. Not for show. Just enough. That night, after the fire had dimmed and the others slept, Sayin stayed beside Reed. She didn't go to her blanket. She stood behind his chair and slipped her arms around his shoulders, resting her cheek to the back of his neck. He reached up, touched her forearm. Neither spoke. Eventually, she moved in front of him, knelt between his legs. The torn deerskin dress still clung to her damp curves, chest rising slow, the neckline open and low from labor and wear. Her skin was warm despite the cold, her thighs marked from days of kneeling, working, surviving. She leaned forward and kissed him again. This time it deepened. She guided his hands, placed them where she wanted, on her hips, her waist, her back. Reed didn't rush, didn't grab. His touch was steady, restrained. Her breathing grew heavier. She slid onto his lap, pressing herself closer. Still no words. They made love quietly, without a bed, without ceremony, just skin against skin, shared heat under firelight, and breath in the dark. When it ended, she stayed curled against him, her hand resting flat on his chest, her cheek to his shoulder. And for the first time, he held someone with both arms, not to protect, not to rescue, but to keep. The storm still raged outside, but inside, they had built something steady. By morning, when the snow slowed and light pushed through the shutter slats, no one spoke of what had happened, but changed the air between them. They were no longer just surviving winter. They were surviving together, and none of them were planning to leave. The first clear morning after the storm hit hard and bright. Sunlight cut across the drifts like a blade, throwing sharp edges into the white. The wind had gone still. The snow around the cabin was chest-deep in places. The path to the well was buried. The shed roof had buckled on one side. But inside, the warmth lingered, not just from the fire, but from the closeness of something that had finally rooted. Sayin woke in Reed's bedroll. They had separated before dawn, quietly, before the others stirred. She returned to her own blanket with slow steps and steady breath. But the shift was felt. Reed didn't try to hide it, nor did she. No one asked questions. That was the language they all shared now, silence as respect. By mid-morning, they were outside, clearing snow. Reed shoveled from the porch to the shed. Paya broke up the ice dam at the roof edge. Kaya and Nolly cleared the goat pens. Tala, bandage removed for the first time in days, limped through the path Reed had carved, carrying a pail with both hands, her face red from cold, but smiling in a quiet, private way. It was Sayan who noticed the tracks first. She was near the north fence, raking slush away from the post base when she spotted them. Boot prints. Fresh. Deep. Not theirs. She didn't shout. She walked back to the porch and caught Reed's eye. He saw her face and knew before she spoke. They walked the property line together, found the trail near the trees. Whoever it was had come up from the south, circled wide, then turned back. Didn't come close to the cabin. Didn't knock. Just watched. Same man. Sayan asked. Could be, Reed muttered. Could be worse. They followed the prints to the ridge line before the snow had begun to erase them. Too late to track further. Back at the cabin, the women had gathered near the fire. Tala looked worried again. Nolly stood with her arms crossed. Kaya gripped the same piece of stitching for minutes without threading the needle. Reed came in and laid down his rifle on the table. If someone's watching, they didn't want to be seen. Paya spoke. Yet, Sayan folded her arms. They're not coming for mules anymore. Reed looked at each woman in turn. You don't have to wait to be told to go. If you want out before spring, before this gets worse, I'll help you pack, load the wagon. I'll even go with you as far as Fort Cavanaugh. No one moved. Kaya spoke first. Leave what? Go back where? There's no tribe waiting, Paya added. Nolly stepped forward. Even if we left, we'd be split again. Some will be taken in, some wouldn't. Tala didn't say anything. She simply walked to Reed, reached for his hand, and wrapped her fingers around two of his. Reed looked down at her, startled. I don't want to go, she said. He held her gaze. Then you don't. Sayan nodded. Neither do I. The rest didn't speak, but they didn't need to. That night, Reed checked the windows twice. He moved his rifle near the door and sharpened the old hunting knife he hadn't touched in months. Sayan helped lay more firewood inside. Paya blocked the lower half of the chimney flue just in case someone tried smoke. They weren't panicking. They were preparing. Later, once the chores were done and the cabin dimmed again to firelight, Reed sat on the edge of the bedroll and leaned his head into his hands. His breath came slow, not from fear, but from the weight of it. He'd gone years without anyone in this space. Years where the only voice was his own, or the wind through the boards. Now the room was full. 5 women, each with their own grief, their own strength, their own way of surviving. And somehow, they trusted him. Sayan came to him quietly and knelt at his side. Her hand rested on his thigh, grounding him. You didn't ask for this, she said softly. No, Reed murmured. But you didn't run from it either. He looked at her. In the firelight, her hair hung loose. Her skin still bore fading bruises from travel, but she looked more solid now, more rooted. Her dress, still worn and ripped across the chest, no longer looked like something broken. It looked like armor that had endured. Sayan leaned forward and kissed him. Not rushed, not for comfort. A slow, certain kiss. When they parted, she whispered, We stay. If they come, we stand. Reed wrapped his hand around the back of her neck and pulled her close again, resting his forehead against hers. He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. Outside, the snow began to fall again. But inside, they were ready, not just to endure, but to claim what had become theirs. The snow stopped for good in the second week of January. What was left behind was hard-packed earth and wet thaw, streams reawakening beneath the crust, steam rising off roof shingles in the morning sun. The light hit different now, longer, clearer, pulling them toward spring. But the feeling that they were being watched hadn't passed. Each day after the thaw, Reed walked the ridge trail twice, once at dawn, once before dark. He took his rifle, but never found fresh prints. No broken branches, no drag marks. Whoever had come that day was either gone or hiding better now. Inside the cabin, the rhythm deepened. Tala had healed fully. She no longer limped. Instead, she helped Paya rebuild the goat shed wall, nailing the boards in place without complaint. Kaya kept busy baking with what flour remained, quietly proud when Reed said it reminded him of his mother's biscuits, though she didn't smile much. Nolly, often the most reserved, had begun drawing on the walls. Small carvings, nothing loud, just shapes, symbols, soft lines with a knife tip. She didn't explain what they meant. No one asked her to. Sayin stayed closest to Reed. They no longer danced around each other. At night, she slept in his bedroll. Her dress was torn the same way it had been from the beginning, but now she chose not to repair it. Not because she couldn't, but because she knew he saw her as she was and never once made her feel less. He kissed her every night, sometimes slow, sometimes long, sometimes with a need that stayed quiet but deep. They hadn't spoken of love, but it lived in how they moved around each other, in how she reached for him when her hands were cold, in how he stirred her coffee before handing it over, in the way he sat closer when the others weren't watching, his knee pressed lightly to hers. It was Sayin who brought up the next part, what the others had likely been wondering. It was late, fire low, her head on Reed's chest. If spring comes and the lawman returns, what's our answer? Reed ran a hand through her hair slow. Depends what question he asks. He'll ask if we're yours, she said plainly. If we belong here. Reed thought for a long moment. Then, you do. Sayin sat up, half covered in the blanket. Her skin was warm, her eyes steady. All of us. All of you. Sayin's voice dropped low. Not just as workers. Not just as mouths to feed. Do you mean it? Reed stared at her. I mean it. The next morning, he brought out the ledger from the chest beneath his bed. Inside were papers from the army, old land filings, and a faded county stamp pad. At the table, while the others cleaned and stitched, he sat down and began to write. One by one, he filled out names. Sayin, Kaya, Nali, Paya, Tala. He marked them as permanent residents, listed them as kin under household protection, wrote that they were under his legal guardianship, not because he claimed ownership, but because it gave them status. It gave them safety. He didn't ask for approval. He just did it. When he finished, he passed the pages to Paya. She read them, said nothing, then nodded once and handed them to Kaya. By nightfall, each woman had read the page with her name on it, and none had packed a single thing. The next day, Reed hitched up his wagon and made the long ride down to Canyon Post. It took most of the day. When he returned, the pages were stamped, dated, filed. Legal. By dusk, they were no longer just a collection of strangers under one roof. They were a household. That night, Sayin waited for him by the fire. She didn't speak. She just rose, untied her dress slowly, and stepped into his arms. He held her close and steady, kissed her like it was the first time, touched her like he'd been waiting all his life to be chosen. They made love again, this time slower, with no fear between them. Her body was curved and warm beneath his, her mouth open against his skin. She didn't rush. She guided. She let him see every inch of her and didn't flinch once. When they lay wrapped together afterward, quiet and steady in the firelight, Sayin looked at him. You know what they'll call us, she said. Reed kissed her bare shoulder. Let them. She smiled, tired but proud. You gave us more than a roof. You gave me more than silence, he answered. In the corner, Tala stirred in her sleep. Paya turned over on her blanket. Nali snored once. Kaya muttered something in Apache and rolled onto her side. In the cabin, once a place of grief and ghosts, felt like home. Not borrowed, not temporary, real. By the end of the week, Reed knew the thaw had truly come, because none of them talked about leaving anymore. They were already where they belonged. Spring didn't arrive all at once. It crept in slow, in the shifting smell of wet dirt, in the thawed trickle running down the ridge, in the quiet return of birdsong at dawn. By mid-March, the snow was nearly gone from the valley, and patches of green peeked through the rock. The cabin, weathered and smoked dark from winter, stood proud under open sky. The danger didn't return. The lawman from Wolf Hollow never showed again. No riders, no accusations, no trouble. But Reed stayed cautious. Each morning, he checked the line of trees. Each evening, he walked the path to the creek and back. Not out of fear, just habit. Protection wasn't about panic. It was about presence. Inside, the cabin had changed in small, permanent ways. Tala hung a wind chime of carved bone and twine above the window. Kaya kept herbs drying over the stove. Nali drew new symbols each week, now with charcoal, now with color. Paya patched the front porch and fitted a bench by hand. Sayin planted corn near the shed, a small row at first, then more as the soil softened. And Reed? He began smiling again. Not wide, not often, but real. The women had made space for him without demanding him to change. And because of that, he did change, naturally, slowly, into someone who didn't flinch when touched, who didn't guard every word like it might be his last. He hadn't expected to build a family, but he had one now, and the townsfolk noticed. Word spread through the post office in Canyon Post. Reed Callahan had taken in 5 Apache widows. No one knew if it was for pity, for marriage, for scandal. But by April, the rumors burned down to ash. Because when the town clerk rode up for a routine check and found the cabin clean, the papers in order, the women working the land, and smiling at the man who'd filed their names with respect, there was nothing to say. No law had been broken, only silence. One evening, under a soft orange sky, Reed walked out behind the cabin where Sayin stood rinsing cloth in a basin. Her hands were wet. Her dress clung to her hips. She looked over her shoulder as he approached, then wiped her hands on her skirt. "You're breathing heavy," she said. "I was hauling stone," he replied. "You sound like an old man." "I'm an old man," he said, grinning. She tilted her head, narrowed her eyes. "Not that old." He stepped closer. "I want to ask you something." She crossed her arms. "You can't ask me to leave now. It's too late for that." He shook his head. "I want you to marry me." She stared at him, not shocked, not smiling yet. "Is this about the law?" she asked. "No." "Is it about keeping others away?" "No." She studied his face. "Then why?" Reed swallowed. "Because you're the strongest person I've ever met. Because when I wake up, I look for you first. Because when I think about what I want 10 winters from now, it's this. All of it. You. Them. This life." Sayin exhaled slow. Her hands dropped to her sides. She stepped forward and pressed her forehead to his chest. He felt her fingers curl into his shirt. "I never planned to belong to anyone again," she whispered. "But I'll be yours." Reed kissed the top of her head. "Only if you want." "I want," she said, "but I won't wear white." He chuckled. "I didn't ask you to." "Good," she said, "because I'm not changing the dress either." She pulled back, gave him a sly look. "Even torn like this." He looked at her bare shoulder, the rip along her chest, the way her skin gleamed from sunlight and water. "I wouldn't want you in anything else," he said. They married under the spruce tree behind the cabin 2 days later. No preacher, no crowd, just them and the others watching. Paya stood beside Sayin, arms crossed but smiling. Kaya held the small braid Sayin had woven into her own hair, Apache tradition passed woman to woman. Nolly carved a small symbol into the tree, a joined circle. Permanent. Tala brought wildflowers from the ridge and placed them at their feet. Reed spoke one sentence. "You stay with me, and I'll stay with you." Sayin answered, "Then we stay." And that was it. The sun warmed them. The land accepted them. The wind moved but didn't take anything with it. That night, as dusk folded over Silver Butte and the goats quieted, Reed sat on the porch with Sayin in his lap, her back against his chest. The others laughed inside. Someone, maybe Nolly, was singing. A soft, unfamiliar tune. Sayin's hand rested on her stomach. Reed noticed but didn't ask yet. She turned her head. "In a few months," she said. He held her tighter. "You scared?" She shook her head. "Not anymore." Reed stared out across the field, where the corn had just begun to sprout. "They won't understand it," he murmured. Sayin smiled. "They don't have to." And they sat there in silence, two people who had lost everything but found the one thing that mattered more. They stayed. And that was the love. That was the end. That was the home.